Hey there, beautiful people. Welcome. I'm Amrita from Atria Jewelry, and today we are going to make an inverted teardrop earring. So, this is a style that I've been making for years now, one of my most popular ones. I get to use accent beads, little larger beads that we don't often know what to do with in this style. So, I'm going to show you a couple of different versions of this, and then we're going to make one with these beads, and then you'll see how I do that. And you could do that with different combinations, and especially if you have odd numbers of beads, you could use them up in this sort of pattern. Here's an example of earrings I made in that same reverse teardrop pattern. I had these beautiful wooden hand carved beads, and they're a little big. They used to be on a necklace, but I would do it more justice as earrings. I tend to wear a lot more earrings, and I thought this way it accents the bead. It's not too large for the ear once it's hung like this. So I really enjoy this pair of earrings. So this is the same technique we're doing today. And here is another version of that same style. I've used these. These are from a vintage necklace. I'm not sure if I showed you one of these beads in a haul before, but this is from a vintage necklace, and I thought a great way to use these disc beads. Again, something that are used in necklaces, but you don't see them used in earrings much, but this is a nice way to do it. In my most recent haul, I did show you these beads. I was thinking maybe I would do one reverse teardrop pair of earrings with these beads as an accent too, like to mimic this. So if we have time today, I will do that as well. So let's get started. Tools you will need: a ruler, a flush cutter, a bent nose or chain nose pliers, needle nose or chain nose pliers, so you need 2 pairs of pliers, a round nose or a 6-step bail making plier. I like the 6-step looping pliers because then my loops are more consistent. And last but not the least, a metal or jeweler's file. Optional tools: a jeweler's hammer and a steel bench block. And now for the materials, I'm using 16 gauge copper wire. Basically, you want a thick wire, as thick as you can use to get through your beads. So if you look at this pair, I used 14 gauge because the hole in the bead was big enough to take that. But for these beads, I couldn't get a 14 gauge in here. So I'm using a 16 gauge wire here, and I have cut myself 3.5 inches. And if you do that, about 3.5 inches, and you have about 1/2 inch worth of beads on there, your earring will be about 2 inches. So that's approximately the size of this earring. You will need a pair of ear wires, and then you'll need 24 gauge copper wire. I have 2 lengths of 10 inches each, so 1 length of 10 inches per earring. I'm going to set this aside here so you can see what I'm doing and how I'm mimicking that. And then I am going to start with first creating a stopper on the end. So I'm going to file this end a little bit and then hammer it down to flatten it so it anchors the bead against that. Now that I have that end rounded off, I'm going to pull out my bench block, steel bench block, and my hammer, and hammer that down a little bit. And I only want to hammer the end, and just enough so the bead stays on and doesn't slide off. There we go. And I usually make both the earrings at the same time so that I can make it about the same size. So as you can see here, I will file that down a little bit to match that in length. But for the most part, that's going to be a good length. Now that I have that hammered, I'm going to slide on my beads in the pattern that I want, and I want it to be the blue, the white, the wood one, and then the white disc and the blue. So that's the pattern for this. And now what I'm going to do is take my 6-step looping pliers, and I'm going to use the largest step to fold the wire over. So I'm going to hold somewhere in the middle and then push the wire so that this end hits the top of this bead. We want it to anchor there. And so you might need to pull this off to the side just a little bit so that once the loop forms, it'll center. And then we're going to move that wire all the way over. And if you find that you're not centered all the way, that's fine. You can adjust it. So I'm going to just move my pliers over just a little bit and get it to that center. And then center this. So I'm holding that wire against itself and centering that bead. So you could just stop right here, your hook on, and your earring is done. But I like to add a wrap there. One, it gives it a finished look, but it also then strengthens that and makes sure that this stays and it doesn't just slip off. So now to wrap this wire around and make that kind of free knot up there, I'm going to hold the wire between my thumb and finger and then start at the bottom and work my way up. About the same length for both. You could, if you're doing both at the same time, I would count your wraps. That's the easiest way to keep it about the same size. And then I'm going to go back over. Just make sure to compare and look. It doesn't have to be identical, but look comparable. So this is going to be how I want to wrap it. And then as I get back to the bottom, I'm going to pull that wire through. So you can see it's yanked it right there between the bead and the metal. And now I'm going to snip that off with a pair of flush cutters right there and use my needle nose pliers to tuck them in. So I want to tuck that end in as much as possible. And then I'm going to snip off this top wire as well, because that's what we started with. And then just ensure that's tucked in too. So this is a completely optional step, but once you've done this, I like to hammer and texture the front a little bit and then make sure that the hammered part down here is facing forward. And then I'm going to texture this teardrop just a little, very gently. And the reason I like to do this is, one, it work hardens that copper and keeps the shape, but it also, as it patinas or if I antique and polish it, it gives it some nice texture. There we go. And now all I need to do is attach the ear wire. So I'm going to twist the ear wire open, slide that on with the front facing forward, and twist the ear wire closed. And there I have a simple pair of reverse teardrop earrings, and they make really neat statement pieces. Now, using that same technique, let's make a pair of earrings with these beads. So I'm just going to cut this open. And I'm going to use the two largest beads on here. Okay, they're about the same size, so use those two. I like to, just to confirm the size of the bead, I know no one's going to be taking a pair of calipers and comparing them, but sometimes I'm a perfectionist that way, so I'm just going to make sure they're the same size. So this is a size 14 mm bead, and this is a 14 mm bead. So yeah, I'll take those two and we'll start with that. Now we can decide how we want to make this happen. I'm just going to first see if we want to use these disc beads or not. We can decide that. So let's look at our options here. I'm going to first identify what size of wire will fit in this bead. And this is not a heavy bead, so it doesn't need to be a very thick wire. This is a size 16 and that goes in comfortably. Let's try a size 14. I think for the size of the bead, the 14 might be too big. So I'm just going to, it might look too heavy. So I'm going to go with the 16. Straighten out the wire, and I want it about that same length, that 2.5 inches, including the ear wire. So I'm going to cut myself here 3.5 inches of this wire, 2 of them for the earrings. I'm using a pair of these old broken ones for cutting these thicker wires. That way I keep my new ones for the finer wire cutting. I broke this tip doing some heavy wire with it, so I don't throw away my tools very easily. I like to get the most out of them. Okay. So I have these. Let's see what would look nice. Do we want to do a gold bead, the blue bead, and the gold bead, and that can be the earring? Or would we like to just do the gold bead and the blue bead? That might be nice. I know just the turquoise bead might actually make it more versatile, but then this makes it a mixed metal pair. Maybe we make one of each. What do you think? Which one do you like better? Do you like it with the gold and the blue? Or do you think just the blue would look nice? We're going to start with filing this end like we did with the previous pair. This is the most time-consuming part of this process, is just the filing. Everything else is really quick. I'm going to do both at the same time. Now we're going to hammer the ends of this. Going to just straighten this wire so the bead can slip on nicely. And then we're going to slip on the beads. So here, okay, so see, that's not wide enough. That's going to slip right through. And I'm going to hammer this out further. Okay, there we go. And we can shape this up a little bit, but at least that's holding the bead. So we're going to do that with this one as well. That's going to hold. So I'm just going to shape this up a little bit. It fanned out a little too much on one side, so I want it a little rounder. So sliding the bead on, making sure it stays put, and doing that with this one as well. I'm just going to move this out of the way. And we are going to rotate that wire again around the largest step. And I'm going to bring that wire over, pull this back a little bit, and pull that wire into that center. And if it feels like it's a little loose, Then you open that wire up in that direction to lengthen it and move this closer. And it's okay if it doesn't stay right up against it, because you're going to move it that way and then bring it back. So there. Now it's going to stay up against that, and then you're going to wrap it. I do the same with this one before we texture it. There we go. I'm just going to make sure that this seems a little bigger on the top, so I'm going to just straighten that out. And there. Now we have both these done. We're going to texture the top and then wire wrap it. And as you can see, the wire might bend, but that's okay. You can hammer it back and then anchor it back down. And now we're going to wire wrap it. So for that, I'm going to be using this 24 gauge copper wire. And I'm going to hold that up against my finger and thumb, and then start wrapping at the bottom and go back up over it. And then go back down and pull that through, and then go back around again. And then we're going to snip that off. And then snip off that starting of that wire. And then make sure to tuck that edge in. And then we're going to do the same with this other one. And then go back, pull that, tug it in there, wrap that a couple of times and snip it off. And now all we have to do is get some ear wires out, and I have some pre-made ones here. Keep this for the next pair. And we're going to attach that. Remember the textured side facing forward. Attach this one. If you would like to see the video on how I make these ear wires, I will link that video down below, and then I will also link to my Etsy listing. If you want to just get a pair of these ear wires, you could get that for your projects too. And here's the finished pair of earrings. So now you have two styles of those earrings. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Have a beautiful day.